Hey everyone, welcome back to Trekyards. I am Captain Foley.
And I am Commander Cockings.
Yes, and today I think it's time to saucer separate some facts from fiction.
Yeah, you just said source separate, and this is not a very thinly veiled.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Why on earth would I say that? That seems rather silly.
Well, could it be perhaps because it's something to do with today's topic? Perhaps you've been doing a lot of research and writing on this. Maybe it's just in your mind all the time.
Well, yeah, I'm always writing and researching things, so...
Yeah, and what was the last thing? And I'm sure this intro is getting a bit long and tedious for everyone out there, but come on, everyone loves our sort of humour, right?
Well, I would hope so. Alright, fine. Today's episode is all about saucer, or should I maybe say ship separation, in Star Trek, because other vessels do have this capability as well. Not too sure if everyone out there knew that, but you will by the end of this video.
Well, obviously not, as we're not presenting information yet. So, why don't we start doing that? Just go straight into it.
Okay, and I gotta say, first off, Samuel, I hope that we never get separated.
Oh.
So saucer separation is an emergency procedure which allows a ship to separate into two, or in some instances more parts, to either avoid catastrophic damage, act as a lifeboat, or be used as a tactical advantage in battle. This usually resulted in a primary and secondary hull configuration, which could be detached from each other along a separation plane.
Yeah, and generally after the order was given, emergency hatches began to be sealed, and power pathways were rerouted for important systems to allow for the process to begin. A general alarm would then sound alerting the crew to proceed to designated safe areas, usually accompanied by a countdown, which could be changed at different amounts of time as the situation called for. Unlike the rather routine source separation we see in TNG, this is an extremely last-ditch manoeuvre, with all crew evacuating to the saucer section by the turbolift or transporters.
Then, explosive bolts would detonate along the separation plane of the ship, thus completing the procedure. The saucer or lifeboat section would then fire the impulse engines, moving it away from the secondary hull or the potential danger. At the same time, reaction control thrusters on the secondary hull would also fire, pushing the whole secondary hull even further away from the saucer section.
During the 23rd century, hull segment separation were actually quite dangerous in most instances, and were only really done in the event of a catastrophic emergency, such as, a warp core breach. So enough time was required to move a safe distance away or raise shields on the saucer section, which hopefully was enough to protect the saucer from any such explosions.
Now, the original Constitution-class ship did have the ability to do this, and it is actually referred to in the TOS episode entitled The Apple. Interestingly enough, the Constitution-class ships have what are referred to as eyebrows on the underside of the saucer section, which were actually retractable landing legs that could be used in conjunction with the upper portion of the neck of the Constitution to form a triangular landing pad configuration. Now, it has been reimagined over the years by many people, but some diagrams do also show us the lower planetary sensor having the ability to actually lower upon touchdown to allow for the crew to disembark. Landing leg hatches can also be easily seen on the underside of the Refit Enterprise, done by Andrew Probert.
The problem with the 23rd century ship separation, however, was the ship could not actually reintegrate or put itself back together again without the aid of a specific starbase or shipyard facility, as extensive repair work was required to install new connectors and attachment points that were sheared away with the explosive bolts. And if the saucer section did indeed in fact need to land on a planetary surface, chances of reattaching both segments was very low. This may save the majority of the crew, but having only sublight impulse engines on the saucer did not leave the crew with many options in most instances. I mean, they are alive, but it's a long distance between systems.
Yeah, but I mean, you can launch a distress beacon or whatever and have
true.
somebody come and rescue you.
Yeah.
Now, in Starfleet Battles, many ships had separation abilities, even Klingon ships such as the D7, which could in fact separate its forward boom section from the main engineering hull. After doing this, however, the rear section becomes unstable and unable to move without the proper command codes, making this section useless to anyone trying to take over the ship. But the boom itself was a self-contained starship and could be used as an escape pod. The rules for Starfleet Battles state, and I quote, "Naturally, the boom is occupied by the captain, senior officers, and female personnel of impeccable genetic qualities."
And the pet targs.
Exactly. Now, I know what a number of you out there are thinking. It doesn't make much sense for a Klingon ship to separate, as it's not honorable to survive a fight by running away in a lifeboat. But there are accidents that can happen, such as a warp core breach or any other number of things that could occur that would require an emergency separation. And I ask all of you out there, where is the honor in dying due to a simple malfunction or accident? Best to survive and fight another day. You know, a day that's actually a good day to die.
I couldn't agree more. But to be fair, seeing how in Star Trek, one of the movies, I think crew just shoots one of his lieutenants for doing a very simple problem. The guy that accidentally made the mistake of making it separate, he's going to get shot anyway by the captain. So I mean, nothing about that's honourable. Or I guess you could just ram people with the main hull, but we might even get to that later on. The separation of Klingon ships is done, as we said, if the ship was facing a warp core breach, or had been taken over by mutineers, seeing how most Klingon ships in Starfleet Battles utilised slave labour in their engine rooms, which I thought was an amazing bit of extra trivia I didn't know.
Yeah.
It's really... We should have a debate on that someday. Should they decide to mutiny, or in fact gain access to critical systems, the crew could seal off those sections and detach, stranding the mutineers with a hull that is not manoeuvrable at all, and the ship's captain can then simply turn the first part of the hull and blow it up. Just annihilate it. It's not good. It's not good. However, with a proper codes, section of the ship could be controlled from the secondary bridge and could maintain fully functional life support, weapons, and engine systems for up to 2 years. This section was, of course, still warp capable and could effect its own rescue much faster, if not destroyed by the captain from the command module. The ship's main boom has small micro-impulse drive units, which can be only utilised for movement after separation has occurred, and allowed for the boom to travel short distances in the hope of rescue. Many of the main Klingon ships in the fleet have this capability, including the B-10, C-9, C-8, D-7, D-6, D-5, F5, and all the Klingon tugs and their variants. The separated boom section can still maintain life support and operate the sensors and weapons for up to 1 year, independent of the secondary hull. And again, this is Starfleet Battles, so D5 not necessarily can happen.
I think it's worth saying too that only the captain has the command codes for the secondary hull. That way, he can't be betrayed by his first officer. He's the only one that has them. So, should that need arise, they can still use the secondary.
And the code's probably more complex than 1, 1B, 2C, just to reference another code out there.
Perhaps, yes. The massive Klingon B-10, as mentioned, also has this feature, but since it has 4 warp nacelles in total, after separation there are still 2 warp nacelles attached to the boom, making the boom of the B-10 still warp capable, just like the Federation dreadnoughts. Also, the Klingon C-8 and C-9 have the ability for warp-capable booms as well, as they each have a single nacelle attached to the bottom of the boom. All of these warp-capable sections also have the ability to detach the nacelles as well in case of overload, which in turn makes it a sublight vessel, just like a standard saucer separation on the Constitution class. After the Klingon boom was separated, the ship's weapons had improved rear-facing firing arcs, as the secondary hull was no longer in the way.
And you've got to think that if a boom separator has these warp, nacelles on, they're not built with another warp core in the boom, so they're going to be using emergency power supply. So any warp they have is going to be limited enough to go somewhere, but they're not going to be full-term impulse in warp drive.
The Klingon B-10 was a pretty massive ship. It did have another warp core, obviously. It reduced speed, obviously, but it was still capable of like warp 5, warp 6, something like that. So
cool. But interesting fact, and this I thought was really interesting, the Romulan ships, which are in fact converted Klingon designs, do not separate at all. And this is, of course, when they gave technology for cloaks for D7s. The separation systems were actually completely removed from the ship and not just deactivated by the Romulans. The Romulans instead chose to add additional reactors to these areas and supplement their power generation, probably for cloaking devices and such.
Yeah, and probably plasma weapons as well.
Yeah.
Saucer separation on the TOS Constitution class ships has intrigued Star Trek fans for many years, and as such we see it in comics, novels, and even fan films. But we will reference those instances a little bit later. But Of Gods and Men has a wonderful scene at the end where we finally get to see a Constitution class ship actually saucer separate, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I love it. I love watching that scene over again. I've watched it many times over the years, so I think it's absolutely great. Now all we need to see is a saucer land on a planet's surface without crashing. That would be cool.
It'll happen one of these days. But let's move on time-wise to Star Trek The Motion Picture, which had a scene at the end where we've seen a source separation appear on the movie screen, and not only on the screen, but the big screen. The entire segment had been storyboarded, so we can get a feel for how it would have looked. But essentially what was proposed to have happened was that after V'Ger was destroyed, and the Enterprise was there in orbit, the Klingons that V'Ger actually digitized at the beginning of the movie reappear, and the Klingons open fire at the Enterprise, causing a warp core breach. And as a result, the only thing the Enterprise can do is separate, as the warp core breach was not able to be shut down. That would have been pretty interesting, and a very, very, probably the most dynamic thing Planet Time movie, probably. Hell of a double ending. Seriously.
Yeah. Well, it would have been a very interesting way to end the movie, the first movie, but I'm glad they decided not to do it.
Yeah.
But the storyboards show a close-up of the neck of the ship where the explosive bolts were that caused the actual separation. 2 wedge-shaped pieces would have split off from the front and rear of the neck attachment points to the saucer. The rear one covered what was essentially a gangway door that could be used to disembark crew once the saucer had landed or crashed on a planet's surface. The whole section between those red lines on the neck are in fact the actual separation plane. The upper warp shaft was purged of all warp plasma and coolant. Warp plasma was then transferred into magnetic bottles and stored there until needed. After separation, the saucer would be powered by the ship's nuclear reactors instead, which is very cool. I wish we could actually see that at some point. I would love to see a refit separate. The entirety of both of the vertical and horizontal shafts had to be emptied before they could be reattached, if it ever came to that point. Upon reattachment, the shafts would then be refilled with and reactivated once all the seals had been verified. Now, that whole thing about purging the warp plasma and the coolant, I actually got from Laura Johnson, who wrote Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise. She gave us that little section for the saucer separation to be exclusive in this episode, so that's very cool. It's not actually mentioned in the Mr. Scott's Guide, so
and that's a pretty amazing book. That's kind of a definitive book on the refit. So there you go, an exclusive for you guys. Okay, so now we've covered some of the more obscure stuff. Let's look at a source separation that we think of in Star Trek, the Galaxy class. So, by the 24th century, these separations were designed to be more routine, and with some of the newer classes being designed with the ability to reconnect themselves just anywhere and everywhere. Both parts of ships contained essential systems, allowing for each to function independently for extended periods if need be.
Specifically on the Galaxy class, the saucer separation was primarily designed as a way for the civilian and non-essential crew to escape any dangerous situations in the saucer section, while the senior staff and essential personnel engaged a threat or entered a potentially hostile situation in the star drive or battle section. When a starship was required to separate, the separation sequence was issued by the commanding officer from the ship's main bridge.
The commanding officer, along with most of the senior staff, then transferred to the battle bridge in the star drive section via a dedicated emergency turbolift located just on the right of the main bridge's view screen, while the junior officer was typically left in command of the saucer module. Is that a good idea? I don't know. The saucer was almost always given the directive to seek safety by retreating to a starbase or other allied territory. And I want to quickly jump in there before your next point. I love there's a dedicated turbolift. Like, this is amazing. That shows how fundamental this is to the design, that one of these 4 corners and there's a dedicated turbolift that you really only see in those two or three scenes.
And it makes perfect sense. I mean, it's a function of that ship that's supposed to be routine, and they should have really used it in a few more instances, but budget, right? During the actual separation procedure, the docking latches on the star drive side of the ship collapsed and retracted into the hull of the star drive section. An auto separation was generally used to separate the 2 components of the ship, but a manual option was also available. Engineering staff located in the engineering sections helped the ship's con and operations officer, who were on the battle bridge, monitor and provide support during the separation.
Reintegration of the 2 ships' components was done in the same way, but only in reverse. Again, the option of automated or manual reconnection was available. The latching systems had been designed to accept a failure rate of 1.5 latch pairs per 10 separations. In the event that a single pair of docking clamps failed to seat properly within its passive aperture, the structural loads could be shared adequately among other latches. There were a total of 18 docking latches in the ship's cobra head, or secondary hull section. Each of these were comprised of a diffuse bonded carbide.
Should any key umbilicals or turbolaft paths show a failure condition at the vehicle's interface, the computer will close off the affected elements at the best possible points upstream of the failure. Hardware and software failures will then be dealt with later, once the emergency situation is resolved. Crews on both sides of the vehicle's interface monitor the progress of the separation sequence and are then on standby awaiting reconnection duties.
And though highly unadvised, it was possible to separate the ship at high warp velocities. There was, however, no margin for error while doing this. The slightest mishap or mistake would result in total destruction of both of the ship's components. As soon as the separation had occurred, the non-warp powered saucer section would begin to lose speed, so it was necessary to clear the 2 components very quickly.
Much like the smaller ships from the past century, the saucer sections were designed to make planetfall, preferably on an M-class planet. The bigger Galaxy-class section could not maneuver and gently touch down as easily as the smaller ships of the TOS era. So the saucer was required to make a level approach, if able to, and head towards the ground at a shallow approach angle. While doing some switchbacking back and forth, the ship would choose an area to land based on the terrain. The area required needed to be large, flat, and relatively free of obstacles, like mountains. However, when landing struts were not available or feasible based on approach entry, the ship would attempt a controlled crash and attempt to gracefully come to a stop. In these instances, the vessel would be generally disabled beyond repair.
Which we see in Generations.
We do indeed.
Very, very much. That bridge really got messed up. I saw it the other day looking for something else. It's like, that is a really gone bridge.
They must have had fun wrecking that set. Like, yeah, done.
Or sad, or both.
Well, both,
Probably
yeah.
both. Some tactical uses for this procedure were also used, albeit very ill-advised. Like we see in Part 2 of Best of Both Worlds, Riker uses the saucer section in an offensive capacity against the Borg cube. A brilliant, if not dangerous, idea that happened to work out this time. It was a maneuver like that acted as inspiration for the multi-vector assault mode on the US of Prometheus, which launched in the 2374 roundabout.
It should be mentioned here, too, that we do see a big screen TOS-style saucer separation of sorts in the latest Star Trek movie, Star Trek Beyond.
Yep.
In an alternate reality, the saucer separation could be executed manually if need be, using a 3-prong control system. Once the release system was extended from the wall panel, each lever was folded outward and rotated clockwise to an open position, after which a final confirmation was received via an associated control panel. Once confirmed, the airlock automatically closed at the ship's separation point, and the saucer would automatically separate from the secondary hull.
And it was really nice to see that finally separate on the big screen.
Absolutely.
Interestingly enough, even Klingon ships, and we can assume most spacefaring races, have this capability to prevent destruction of the ship should the nacelles become damaged. In 2267, Captain Kirk considered a plan wherein Chief Engineer Montgomery Scott would discard the warp nacelles and escape with the main section when the original Enterprise was threatened by Val in the episode, the Apple. Ultimately, the separation never occurred. Now, it is not known if the main section referred to just the saucer, or the saucer and the secondary hull without nacelles attached. And while in orbit of Excalibur in 2269, Kirk attempted to order Scotty to disengage the nacelles and jettison if possible. However, the transmission was cut off before the order was even received.
The saucer separation was actually described in the TOS Writer's Guide on page 15, third revision of the supplement. In the guide, the saucer section is described as being, in fact, a completely self-sustained unit which can detach itself from the Galaxy drive units and operate on atomic impulse power for short-range solar system exploration. That almost sounds like it was supposed to reattach, like the secondary hull could stay in orbit, the saucer can go to explore something else and come back.
Well, to be fair, I mean, you look at real Earth science. I mean, the Apollo, how they reconnect, it's such a small amount of, to get it right. I mean, in this future, it's pretty fair stuff. If you've got enough time, you put it together. So I mean, the original version, I'm sure, just put it together. But
that'd be cool.
that could have even been before transporters were around. When they wanted to possibly land the ship. So
exactly. Yeah. And interestingly enough, Gene would actually have preferred if only the Enterprise's saucer section had been destroyed after a separation in Star Trek 3, which would have been a very interesting thing to see as well.
Now, Stuart, you're gonna like this fact. The Excelsior may have actually been able to separate as well. Docking hatches and a battle bridge were seen on the Enterprise B Master Systems display, and the yoke of the ship had several potential separation planes. Similarly, the miniature of the Ambassador class also shows striping in between its saucer and engineering hull, similar to that of the Constitution class Refit. In a recent discussion we had with Doug Drexler, he also speculates that the NX can in fact drop the rear section of the ship, including the nacelles, warp stabilizer, and rear pontoons, just leaving the saucer section, which of course has its own independent impulse engines for movement.
Exclusive there as well, guys. Yeah. Well, I don't know. He might have said it over the years, but although not originally designed to do so, John Eaves has since drawn images and designed a separation routine for the Sovereign class Enterprise E as well. This feature was also eventually added to the Intrepid class, which seems odd, and the capability was added to the USS Voyager as part of its refits upon returning to Earth, as per the Voyager novel, The Eternal Tide. Some interesting instances over the years that refer to saucer separation from various other sources, including novels, will now be mentioned. In the Star Trek The Lost Years novel, A Flag Full of Stars, It shows the original Enterprise undergoing refit, with the saucer section actually on Earth's surface being refitted, planet side. And then the engineering section was in space dock. That book includes a scene where the Decker actually flies the saucer up to the star drive section and attaches it to the thing. So that's interesting. I don't know if I totally buy that, but it is able to make planet fall, so it can be maneuvered in an atmosphere, I guess. So it's interesting.
I don't know why I'd risk that though. And any building, 0G is going to work to your advantage. If you have to work with gravity, just so I think maybe they had to repaint it, and then gravity is useful for paint.
Yeah, it was just an interesting thing that I found out, and I thought it would be cool to see that for sure. I think it'd be cool to see it visualized.
But in the TOS novel, Black Fire also involved a source of separation after a bomb exploded on the Enterprise bridge, causing severe damage to the ship and crew. The ship was reconnected at a starbase facility, however, and then in the TNG novel, Rogue Saucer dealt with source separation as the main theme of the story, when Starfleet trying to design a Galaxy-class saucer that will still be salvageable after landing on a planetary surface.
In the novelization of Star Trek Generations, we see Hikaru Sulu conducting an emergency drill aboard the USS Excelsior when he receives news of Kirk's death from Pavel Chekhov. The ship had just completed the emergency saucer separation when the communication was received. And in the story Till Death, in the Shinsei, or manga Star Trek, that's the first volume, it shows the Enterprise undergoing saucer separation as well.
Very cool. Didn't know that. In the novelization of TNG's encounter at Farpoint, it indicates that Commander Riker had in fact completed manual docking of the source sections of the USS Hood. That's a Excelsior class, and before the USS Yorktown. Also, in the novel Preserver by William Shatner and Judith Garfield Reed Stevens, it suggests that the Enterprise E was capable of separating. And the TNG novel Resistance explicitly mentions the separation of the Enterprise E as part of measures to rescue Captain Picard from the Borg during the events of that novel. God, he always gets captured by the Borg, doesn't he?
The USS Confederate performed a saucer separation during its first mission, testing a new warp accelerator. This was a TOS Constitution-class ship. When the engines began to exceed critical limit. Without the ability to control the warp reaction, the crew jettisoned the saucer as a lifeboat, and the star drive section eventually lost momentum and came to a stop within Romulan space, and was then scuttled in a daring recovery operation by Starfleet security in the TOS Unlimited comic None But the Brave.
And finally, in the video game Star Trek Online, players can perform saucer separations with a number of different starship classes, namely the Exploration Cruiser Retrofit class, based on the Galaxy class, and the Multi-Vector Advanced Escort, based on the Prometheus class.
That's it, guys. Tune in for the next part, which is next week.
Next week? So I have to wait a whole week for next part? Oh.
You do indeed.
But
we'll see you then.
Bye. See you then. Bye.